So last year, I was working with an organization called Luces Panama, and what they do is that they help kids that have epilepsy get their medicine because a lot of the times the families cannot afford it. So our job as a club was to provide the families with anything else that they could need. And this is Luis, and the organization was already working with him and they were providing the medicines for him, but they told us that they had really poor conditions and that they could really use some more help. And we got to know the family, so we met the family and we realized that they really needed the help. They were about 9 or 8 kids in the house, and they didn't even have a door. They didn't have a fence in the house, and they told us that a lot of times Luis would just run out into the street, and it was really dangerous because the cars would pass and they couldn't even see him. So they told us that if we really wanted to help them, they could use a fence. So there were about 10 or 15 of us in the club, and we started selling these purple bracelets that were from the foundation, and we started selling the bracelets to the entire high school, and a lot of people had them, and we were very excited for the project because the family really needed the help, and we decided that since we had some extra money from the bracelets, we were going to build them also a playground. Since there were a lot of kids in the house, we realized that they could really use some place to entertain themselves. So we were excited, and we went on Saturday, and the plan was to build a fence on Saturday. And these were the brothers and sisters. As you can see, there were a lot of kids in the house and they didn't have a door. So the plan was to go on Saturday, and since we don't know how to build a fence, we found a guy that was volunteering to help us build a fence, and he was gonna go on Saturday, and then we were gonna go on Sunday, and the playground was gonna be built on Sunday, so we were gonna finish the playground, and then we were gonna play with them, and we were gonna do a little party for them. And on Saturday, I went with Maddie. She was here yesterday in the Global Village Fair, and I went with Maddie to make sure that everything was going well, and that everything was going as it was supposed to be. And it was going great, even though it was 9, and on Saturday, on Panama, you work, and everyone was sleeping, which was a little weird, but it was okay. We started measuring everything, we started building the fence, and we left the guy there to work. And when we got into the car, one of the neighbors came up to us, and he started telling us that it was very bad that we were helping this family, that we should really not be helping this family because they were bad people, and the community had been trying to get them out of the community for a very long time, and that the house was actually a brothel, and that the kids were drug dealers since they were about 9 or 8 years, and Luis was 9 years. So it was very shocking, and we left. And we started thinking about how sad it was that we had been working for so long on this project, and we were so excited. And now the community didn't want us to help them, and that we might actually be harming the community because they had been talking to the authorities and been trying to get them out, and we were actually building a fence for the house. However, we decided to carry on with the project because we were doing it for the kids. We were building the fence for Luis, and we were building the playground for the kids. So regardless of the choices that the parents could make, we were going to help the kids. However, once the fence was built, the guy was leaving the community. He was about 2, and a shooting broke out right in front of the house. And he had to get under the car, and he had to stay there for about 10 minutes. And then when he left, he was super nervous and super scared, and he told us that there was no way that he was coming back on Sunday. And he was the only person that we had that knew how to build the playground that we were planning to build. And we also realized that we couldn't go because we were about 10 ISP kids, and since I was responsible for the project, we couldn't bring the kids there, and also the foundation was responsible for it, so we couldn't go there. And we ended up leaving all the materials in the backyard of the house, and since we didn't have their phone number, we only had their address, we couldn't even communicate to the family why we stopped the project and why we never come back. So this was hard, and it was a failure. It was a failed project, and it was sad because we had worked so hard on it, but we learned from it. And this project reminded me of a story that I was told when I was in Africa. And it was about an African village, and we have all heard of stories about how in a lot of villages the women have to work for hours to get the water. And in this specific village, the women had to work for 2 hours to get the water. And a group of volunteers came, and they said that they really wanted to help the community. And they asked the leaders of the community what they would like to get. And they said water, because the women have to work for a very long time, and it would be really nice if we had water on the houses so the women didn't have to leave the houses. So that's what they did. And every house in the community got a water well, and they were really happy. The project was a success. And then a few months later, the group came back, and they realized that there was something weird in the community. And once they started investigating and talking to the women, they realized that almost all the women in the community had gotten depressed. And they were a little confused because now they had water, and now they could do a lot more things with their time rather than having to spend them walking to get the water. And they realized that the only time the women were allowed to leave the house was to get the water. And once they had the water in their houses, the husbands wouldn't let them leave the house, and therefore they didn't have time to socialize. So they spent their entire days in the house, and they couldn't talk to their friends, they couldn't socialize, and they got depressed, most of the women. So I was thinking about these two projects, and I was thinking about all the good intentions that they had and how much they were planned, and I was thinking how we can make the projects more effective and actually make sure that they achieve their goals. And I realized that in order to help the people, we need to get to know the people. And I also came up with 4 elements that I'm going to talk about that we need to consider in order to make projects more effective. But by thinking about the people and getting to know the people better, they can become a lot more simple, even though they're very complicated on their own. And the first element is to ask what they need. And this sounds very simple because, of course, we need to ask what they need so we are not just giving things that we think they consider. However, it gets a lot more complicated if they don't know what they need. Sometimes they simply do not know what they need, and sometimes what they need and what they want is different. And if we think they need something that they don't think they need, it might be hard for us to give them something else. For example, I was working with Make-A-Wish, and this is Jose Luis, and this is Caitlin, and they both come from very humble families, and Caitlin had 7 siblings, and they lived with her grandma, and her aunt worked, and she was the one that provided for them, but they had a very difficult situation. And this is Alvarito, and he also had a hard situation, and they were 8 siblings, and when we granted the wish, they asked for school supplies, because they couldn't even afford all the school supplies that all the children needed, so a lot of times they had to share backpack, or they had to share all the school materials. However, when we asked each of them what their wish was, they all said an iPad. And we gave them the iPad because the goal of Make-A-Wish is to make the wishes of kids with terminal diseases, make their wishes come true. So they all got an iPad, and it was hard for us because we realized that maybe what they needed wasn't really an iPad because they wouldn't even have Wi-Fi in their houses. But we later realized that they spent hours and hours in the hospital when they were doing all the treatments, and the iPads would not only let them continue learning, but it would also entertain their minds, and they really needed the tablets and the iPads. So that was actually what they needed, even though we didn't know at the time. So sometimes, even if we ask, it's very hard to separate what they want versus what they need. And in the case of the water well, it shows how complex it can be as well, because they did ask what they wanted. But depending on who you ask in the community, they might tell you different things. So they asked the leaders of the community, which are supposed to represent the people, but if they had asked the women, they would have gotten a different answer probably. But then who do you listen to? Because they're all part of the community. So this is complicated. However, if they had spent more time on the village and they had gotten to know the people, they would have realized that it was the time that the women socialized and that maybe they didn't mind as much walking for 2 hours, or maybe they could have come up with another solution. The second element is to get them involved. And this is very important because a lot of times projects can just get into the community and just give things out into the community without really get the people involved. And a lot of the times the resources are in the community themselves, so you can use the resources in the community. And when I was in Thailand, we started building a playground, and we just came, all the volunteers, we started building the playground, and there were a lot of people in the community that worked in construction, and they did know how to build a playground, but we built it, porque we were the volunteers and we just built it. But if we had gotten the people in the community involved, it would have probably been better built. And it is very likely that they're going to have to rebuild the playground. Even though we did the best we could, we do not work in construction, and we do not know how to build playgrounds. But by getting the people in the community involved, we would not only have created jobs and we would have helped them, but we would also have done a better job. However, this is hard as well, because what happens if they don't want to help themselves? Should you still help them? For example, when we went in Luis's house, there was a lot of trash around here and around the entire floor. There were a lot of sticky things that they would put in their mouths, and it was really dangerous for all the kids because they wouldn't even realize what they were putting into their mouths. And we asked the 2 ladies if, before we came on Sunday to build the playground, if they could clean. And they said, yeah, we'll ask someone to clean. But when we got there, it was dirty and nobody had cleaned. So if they don't want to help themselves, should we still help them? And at the same time, if we're trying to help them, how can we just get there and start asking them to do stuff if we're the ones supposed to help them? So it is also tricky. However, if we get to know them, we can learn how to best integrate them into the project and how to get them involved, and we can know if they actually want to be helped or if we are the ones just giving things away that they don't actually want. The third element is to think big picture. And this is not only in terms of community, but also long-term versus short-term. And in the case of Luis, if we had thought about the community, if we had talked to the community, we would have realized that they didn't want the people in the community. However, should we sacrifice helping one family because the community didn't want them there? Because at the same time, we also thought that maybe they were just mad with the family and that they didn't want the family, but maybe they were not drug dealers. They were just lying to us because they didn't want the specific family. So once you think community versus the family that you're helping, should you sacrifice one for the other? I don't know. And then we were building a school in Malawi, and our job was basically to create bricks, and we created about 700 bricks for the school. And then we started playing with the kids of the community that were gonna go to the school, and we didn't have our phones, we didn't have our iPhones. We tried to not bring a lot of showing, like expensive stuff, but we just had our cameras, and I had my watch, and my watch it was an expensive watch, but it was just white, and it had a little bit of gold paint. And one of the kids grabbed my watch, and he was amazed by it, and he thought it was so beautiful, and he tried it on, and he went around, and he showed all his friends the watch, and then I had to leave, and he was very sad, and he asked me if he could keep it, but I said that he couldn't keep it because that was the only watch that I had for the entire trip. And then we also had to take the cameras away, which they were super excited about, and when we left, they were all sad because we just took everything away. And we came back, and we were thinking if we had actually helped them, if we had actually brought them happiness. And we said that maybe we help them in the short term because they're gonna build the school a little bit faster, but maybe we did some harm long term because they realized everything they didn't have, and they created this idea that Americans have like this beautiful stuff that we can't have, which might harm them in the long term. But on the other hand, we might have harmed them in the short term because we left them sad, but it's gonna help them in the long term because we built a school. We helped build a school, and they're gonna get educated, so we were actually helping them in the long term. So this is complicated because differentiating the effects short term and long term might be hard. Sometimes you just don't know what the effect is going to be, and you don't know how the community is going to react and what the effects are going to be. However, if we had had more time to talk to them and to really get to know them, they would have realized that we were just like them and that we were really trying to help them, and the effects could have been lessened, and it would have been easier to also realize if we should help them regardless of the community in the case of Luis. And then the last one is to seek effectiveness. And this is hard sometimes because this is the one that we have to be the most selfless about. And when I was trying to volunteer for the Red Cross, I soon learned that they do not send volunteers abroad, which is what I wanted to do. And it's because it's just not effective. It is not effective to use all the funds that you can use in a community to get the volunteers to the community when you have people in the country that can help. And for example, I was teaching English in Thailand, and when we talked to the director of the school, we realized that most of these kids would leave the school before they reach high school because the family simply could not afford to pay for high school because the elementary school was free, but the high school was not free, and they had to pay for the high school. But we had used a lot of money going there to teach them English, and we realized that maybe if we had used all those funds that we used to get to Thailand into paying for their high school, we might have done better. However, it is not as simple, because if we had just donated the money, it was just throwing money at them. And if we had gave it to the government, it might have not even gotten to the government. And if we gave it to an NGO, they might have used it for another things. The funds might not have been used the most effectively. And by actually going there, we interacted with them, we got to know them, and we made sure that what we were aiming for, which was to teach them English, was actually achieved. And then, when I was in Zambia, we worked with a girls' club, and these girls went to the club because of their house environment. It was girls that had very harsh environments, and they would go to the school to have a more safe environment, to be with a family. They were all girls, and to get an education. And a lot of the girls, well, when we met with the director of the club, she told us that most of the girls in Zambia miss about 1/3 of their school year because of their periods. When they're under periods, they're not allowed to go to school because they cannot use pads or tampons. And so Kotex heard about this, and they donated a big donation of pads and tampons into Zambia to allow the girls to go to school. However, when they got there, they were not culturally appropriate, and the girls could not use them. So the entire donation went to waste, and they were left still with the problem. So culture has to be taken into account, and once again, we need to get to know the community. If they had actually talked to the girls, they would have realized that they could use clothes, pads, that they can wash and they are reusable and actually more environmentally friendly, and it would have been an even better solution. And in the end, the donations went to waste. So once again, it is not as easy to know what's the most effective way to help and what's the most effective way to use the funds, but by talking to the people and getting to know the community more, it becomes easier. So I have talked a lot about how complex it is and how easy it is for the projects to go wrong. But regardless of that, in all the projects, we did bring smile to the people. And we did teach them that someone cares and that someone was willing to put their time into the project. And regardless of how many times we can mess up, all that we can do is just try again and try to get them a little bit deeper each time and never try to make a change. Thank you.